Hi, my name is J.R. Bowling, and this is my presentation on how I would teach a class on STDs. I have three objectives. My first objective would be explaining what an STD is and how they can be acquired. My second objective would be then explaining the basic signs and symptoms of STDs so that they can be detected if one acquires an STD. And the third objective would be to be able to teach the proper precautions to prevent STDs. So this would be my first slide where I explain what an STD is, what STDs stand for, and also how they can be acquired. Here would be where my first active learning comes into play. My active learning activity that I came up with was to split the class into two groups using the numbering system, and then I would give each group a cell phone, and those cell phones have only one number in it, which would be my number. I will then ask them questions from a quiz that I've made up, and they will get together as groups and text in their answer. I thought throwing in technology and using it as like a fun tool instead of, phones being banned and taboo in class would be kind of a cool way to keep their attention and keep them captivated. The questions that I've made up for this quiz are some, at this point, I expect them to be able to answer, and some that I don't expect them to be able to answer yet, but definitely expect them to be able to answer after I'm done teaching the class. Also, this is a good tool for me to see how much they learned and how much they retained by the scores that we got at the beginning of the presentation or the beginning of class, and the scores that we got at the end of class. So the first question that I have on this quiz is, what does STD stand for? And at this point, I would definitely expect them to be able to answer that question. STD obviously stands for sexually transmitted disease. My next question would be then, what is an STD? And also would definitely expect them at this point in the presentation to be able to answer this question. An acceptable answer, or the only answer really, would be a viral or bacterial infection. My third question on this quiz is, how can you get an STD? And some kids at this point would be able to answer this question, I believe, and some kids wouldn't, depending on if they were sexually active or not. This isn't something that I have covered in the presentation yet, so I wouldn't be as disappointed if they weren't able to answer it right away. Now again, definitely at the end of the class, I would definitely expect them to answer this question. But the question, or the answer to this question that I would accept, would be by being sexually active and having sex with someone who has an STD. Now we're getting into the questions where I definitely don't expect them at this point in the class to be able to answer the questions correctly, but again, definitely at the end I expect them to be able to. My fourth question on this quiz is, how can you prevent yourself from getting an STD? And some acceptable answers I would give, or would be, by using protection if you're sexually active. Another possible answer would be getting tested at least every 6 months if you're sexually active. It's recommended that you get tested every 3 months. Also, getting vaccinated against diseases that are available. And then obviously the number one answer for how can you prevent from getting an STD is abstinence, of course. The fifth and final question that I have on this quiz would be, what are the basic signs and symptoms of STDs? And some answers that I have are sores and bumps on the genitals or oral and rectal areas, also painful or burning urination, discharge from the penis, unusual or odd smelling vaginal discharges, unusual vaginal bleeding, having pain during sex, also sore, swollen lymph nodes, particularly in the groin, but sometimes widespread, low abdominal pain, and rash over the trunk or hands or feet. So those are just some questions that I would expect them, again, at the end of this to be able to answer all of. Which brings us to our next, which is, this is just an informational slide, has some facts and things that are interesting to know. This would be our number 2 objective. This is where I would teach them about the basic signs and symptoms of an STD, so that maybe later on in life, or now even, if they have some of these signs and symptoms, they can be detected and everything can be taken care of. Which then brings me to my next active learning activity, which I have decided to, again, split the groups up into the same 2 groups that they had just for when they were taking the quizzes, and I'd give them each group an article. One group would have articles over certain types of STDs and viruses and things of that nature, and then the other group would have an article over prevention of STDs and things that they can do to help themselves stay healthy and clean. Now, what I would expect them to do is give them about 15 minutes apiece at this point in the class to not only read over the articles that they have and gain all the information that they can, but to be able to then get in the front of the class and teach the other group what they learned about. So that would take a total of about 30 minutes probably, because I would give them probably 10 minutes to explain each article to the other group. And I feel like that would be very, very good for active learning, because they would be not just sitting there listening to a lecture and looking at an article, they would actually be having to understand what they're looking at and be able to teach it to somebody else. Where I know for me personally that if I'm able to teach somebody else something that I'm trying to learn myself, it helps me to make different connections in my own head to actually lock in the information that I need to have. So I thought that would be a good activity for the kids, also enjoyable as well. Nobody likes to work alone, all the kids like to be in groups. So that was my second activity. And this now brings me to my third objective, which I think is probably the most important part of the whole presentation. If I wanted the kids to take anything out of this, it would be definitely the prevention of STDs. And that's because obviously it makes our whole community, our whole nation, our whole world a safer place if we're all informed about the proper precautions and preventions that we need to take to stay healthy and to stay smart about what we're doing with our sex lives. And at this point, I would go right back to the quiz, and I would again give the cell phones back to the kids, get them back in their same groups. Then probably at this point elect a team captain on each group and let them be the ones handling the phone and making sure that it was all in order. I would ask the questions again. Again, the first question is, what's an STD? Again, all this I expect them to be able to 100% answer, because obviously in here by slide 3, I expect them to be able to answer questions 1, 2, and 3 on this quiz. By slide 5, I expect them to be able to answer question 4 as well. And then by slide 6 in the PowerPoint, I expect them to be able to answer question 5. And again, like I said, the first question is, what does an STD stand for? They would then, again, all talk to each other in the group, and the leader of the group would text me the answer. Question number 2, what is an STD? Again, same thing, same routine, get together, talk, leader of the group, text me the answer. And I would also be taking down results of the answers to see which group, if either, gets a higher score on. the third question, how can you get an STD? Fourth question, how can you prevent from getting an STD? And the fifth question, what are the basic signs and symptoms of STDs? All this being said, at the end of this, whichever group, this is more their motivation to pay attention as well, at the end of this, whichever group gets the highest score, I give an overall grade of 10 extra bonus points to that group. In that case, this is my conclusion, and here's my reference page, and that is the end of my presentation, and that's how I would teach a class on STDs.